All right, so a forest fire example, here it is. So we're going to set up an n by n grid. This is something you guys will code up. Sites are going to, there's going to be some density to the thing, but we're going to figure out a way to reallocate it, not in a random way, but there's an overall density, right? So it goes from 0, no trees, to 1 where every site has a tree. So therefore, same thing. So this is, so if we just bin all the, we take all the sites and count up all of them and so on, that's fine. But there's going to be structure in here as well. Okay. So we need to figure out how to allocate them. And from a, if you say, oh, you can fill up half of this forest with trees, and how do you want to do it in an optimal way? That's a huge combinatorial problem, right? You can't enumerate them all and say, test them all. So we're going to have a strategy to get around that. But in principle, that's what you'd want to do. Let's try every possible forest. But you have to get there. You have to grow it some way so that sort of makes sense. You'll see this very stylized, not how forests work kind of thing, but it has this growth aspect to it. Or at least a testing evolutionary aspect, let's say it like that. So fire's going to start at some location. We've got ij, right? According to some distribution, pij. So here's our environmental attack, right? We've got a forest, trees that are next to each other. If a tree burns, then the trees next to it burn, just adjacent, right? Just the 4 adjacent trees. You can put on lattices, whatever you want, put on other lattices or think about other kinds of connections. But that's just a very simple game here, right? So tree burns, and then any trees on the adjacent lattice points will also burn, and then that will continue. And you don't have to run that process. You just have to know this tree is part of this cluster. Any tree that burns in there, that's off, right? So you want to do a thing where you find all the cluster sizes, then basically this is you're going to turn your computer into a rampant arsonist, right? It's going to just light up this forest over and over again. It's going to be kind of messed up. You're going to put the forest back together and then light it up again, and then do it again, and do it again, do it again. All right. But each time you do it, you're going to choose a site based on some underlying probability distribution. So our pyromaniacs will kind of have some uneven distribution in where they are. That's really where this starts, right? So if it's an even distribution, you have no idea where the attack will come from, then you might as well just put your trees down randomly, right? There's no great way to, you don't want to bunch them up on one side versus another side because, right, it's completely uniform. So fires are spread from tree to tree. And right, as I said, connected clusters will burn, so you don't have to run the simulation. You just go count up. Empty sites will block fire, and so here's the idea. Here's the little game you want to play. You're handed this. You're told the grid is whatever it is, 64 by 64. It takes a while to do this, and it's kind of impressive. This paper's from the end of the 90s, actually, when the first paper, it's a whole sequence, that they were able to do some of this computationally back at the time on a Pentium 3 or whatever was the thing. Okay, so here's what we want. We're going to build fire breaks, and the fire breaks will just be these empty cells. So essentially, we're going to build a forest with fire breaks to maximize the number of trees left on average, right? So we're going to build our forest. It's going to have a density, say, of 75%. We're going to put them all down, and then we're going to test over and over again with this. Right? We're going to say light, 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 light. And on average, we'll get an on average number of trees burnt. Sometimes they'll be bad, right? They might burn a whole lot, but on average, if it's not too bad, then we're fairly happy with it. And then you set up another forest, and you set up another forest, and you set up another forest, and then test and test and test. So if let's say this is the grid, if all of the sparks are in this corner, whatever, there's just some kid here things have gone wrong, and they're just they want to light up trees, and they can't move for some reason, then you fill this whole thing up with trees, right? And there'd be just this little barrier around here. This will be a little place here, right? And so that'd be fantastic, right? Every time this lights up, nothing burns. And so you've got this, on average, your size of your fire is 0. So that's how you would eventually find that. You'd add trees and eventually get that. But if there's some distribution that's coming out like this, then maybe you want to put a lot of trees over there to start with, right? Maybe it's more concentrated. The lightning strikes are concentrated over here, but kind of have some distribution going out this way. Yeah, then you want to fill up over here and then come in this way, come in this way, come in this way. But you want to sort of build a fire break around this, right? And then the question is, what are all these little patches like in terms of size, in terms of area? So here's the example. And so here's the way to get around this horrible problem of like how would you enumerate all possible forests, right? We can't do that. Makes funny noises. We can't do that. So we're going to do sort of a greedy approach, right? Computer scientists love this sort of thing. Love proving in incredible, excruciating detail that it works really well. But this is just here's a little ad hoc way of doing it. So we're going to add this thing now, a design parameter, which is going to be how many times you can test adding a tree. So you've got your current forest, and you add one tree to it, test it by letting all these lightning strikes go. So a lightning strike goes, see how much is burnt, put it all back together, another lightning strike, burn it again. And the way to do this is you actually allow you go through and test every possible cell. You say a lightning strike here, lightning strike here, lightning strike here, and then you can multiply by the probability there was a lightning strike there. So you don't have to do sort of like one at a time, like one actual lightning strike. You can go through all possible cells and say, here's a lightning strike, burns this much, put that forest back together. Here's a lightning strike, burns this much, put the forest back together. So you can actually go through all of the initial points and then weight them by their probability of happening in the first place. So that's nice. So it feels like you can get a very thorough way of doing it. But here's the extra detail now. You're allowed to test D new locations for a tree. So you've got your forest, it's laying out, maybe there's a space here. You randomly choose that space to add a tree to. You put the tree in, now test it. Let's say D equals 2. You test it completely, you get the average forest fire for adding a tree there. Then you take it away, and then you randomly choose another open space. So it's here, you put a tree there, and you test it all again. And then you take the best of those two. Look.
When you said weight them by the probability that they would burn, is that going to be uneven based on the distribution?
Yes. So if it's even, and you could run the simulation, if it's even, then you shouldn't really get any particular structure in it'll try, but you shouldn't get much structure there. And it's going to be bad. Yeah, it's going to be bad. That's, and we fear randomness for good reason, right? It's just, there's no way we can cope with it. It's true we go to casinos and lose all our money, but that's probably a different feature of humanity, voluntary tax. All right. Okay, so this is a design parameter. And, right, we're going to average over the spark probability, or pyromaniac probability. So if D equals 1 will be just random addition. You can do your testing, right? You've got your forest, it's half filled. You've got half of this big grid filled with trees. You randomly choose one of the open spaces, put a tree in it. You can test it, but you have nothing to compare it with, right? There's no design here. So that will be just random allocation of trees, which will be like percolation. You're just filling in things randomly. It'll feel like the percolation model. So the percolation model is a good thing to work on first, because there's no design in that whatsoever. That's this current assignment. And then this next piece, we lift it up a little bit. D equals n squared, then you test everything. This is still not the same as testing every possible configuration, because we're going to build out from like 0 trees, 1 tree, 2 trees, 3 trees, and it's going to be built on the best path that we got to 5 trees. We can't go back and test every possible thing. It's greedy. By an n squared, of course, as it fills in, there aren't, right? You lose places to put things. So this is kind of in quotes. It's like basically you test everything that's open. Yeah. All right. And so if the probability of a spark in each cell was 0, which could be, right? It's just like it's not a dangerous thing. Then you just fill it up with trees. Nature will do that. Of course, you get very weird things with evolution, right? So some trees will seeds will come out when they're burnt, which is just weird. So Australia has those sorts of things. Yeah. I mean, that's pretty fantastic. That's like really long-term stuff. It's good thinking by evolution. Oh, it doesn't work like that. But anyway, so every time you add something, you're going to measure the average area of the forest that's left untouched. Of course, when you start and you've only got, say, 3 trees out of this big space, maybe they're never burnt, right? They're going to get burnt now and then, rarely, and so on, but most of the time you keep what you have, but you didn't have a very big forest anyway. So we have to weight that, right? So we're going to be adding more and more trees. It's getting bigger and bigger. So we're going to potentially be able to preserve more and more of that, hopefully. And eventually, if we fill it up with all trees, right, eventually, I mean, at that limit, then absolutely every spark burns the whole thing down. So eventually you have to get to a point where every forest fire is n squared size, right? So when there are no trees, it's 0. When it's full of trees, everything burns every time because we'll always have a normalized distribution. Everything burns every time. So there's something that has to go up and down in some way, at least, right? Maybe it's got wobbles because it's weird, but you could imagine it has to go up and down. So we're going to have a distribution of fire sizes. So there's that. There's the average area, but there's also just what's the distribution. So given this configuration, let's light it up in all these ways, what's the distribution of fire sizes, right? And we'll talk about the yield as being the density. So it's the density of trees minus this average fire size. So this is this thing where I'm just sort of trying to talk about the limits. So at the limit of no trees, this is 0, and this is 0 because forest fire sizes are 0. There are no trees. At the limit of all trees, then this is a 1, and every forest fire is of size 1, or it's n squared. This is normalized by the thing. So it will always be, the yield will be 0, right? Nothing left. So this is what you started with. This is how much was burnt on average.